So we're going to be taking a look at the useContext hook. Now, one of the most frequently asked questions I get about this is how you can store a user in the context and share it throughout your application. So in this video, we're going to be using the useContext hook to do just that. So what I have set up here is a small application using React Router. What it looks like is I have a single page or two pages. I have an about page and a home page, and you can toggle back and forth between them. And so what I want to do is I want to be able to grid the user, or who the current user is, on both the home page and the about page. So that's what we're going to do in this video. Now the code for this is right here. This is my router. So I have a navigation bar that's being displayed on each page, and then I have React Router DOM router and a route that's displaying an index and an about page. Now my index looks like this, and my about page looks like this. So very basic components. We just have an H2 that is being displayed. So let's go ahead and get started with this. So the first thing that I want to do is create a context to share between my components. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it the useContext.js. And I'm going to import from React, and what I'm going to import is create context. And I'm going to say export const user context is equal to create context. And here I can pass in what I want the initial value to be. In this case, I'm going to have the initial value be null. So now this user context, I'm going to import in my app over here. So I'm going to say, and I'm going to wrap the components in a provider. Now this is going to encompass all my components that I want to be able to grab the state from. So for example, if I want to get in my index and my about page, both of those components, if I want to get the user context value, then in my provider I need to wrap these two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say user context.provider, and this is a component which I wrap around whatever components I want to supply, be able to get the context for. Alright, so I have my provider here, and then I can pass some kind of value. So the value I'm going to pass is just hello from context. So now what I can do is any of the children components inside of this provider, I can get the value. So how do I do that? Well, let's start with the index page over here. So I can say const message is equal to useContext. So we're going to use the useContext hook. And now we pass in the context that we want to get the value for. In this case is this user context that we created. I'm going to copy that over, and I'm going to import that. And so now I can display this message. So I'm going to display a div here, and I can display my message. So now if I go to the home page and give this a refresh, oh, did I crash things? Nope, I just forgot to restart it. So we'll restart this back up. So now when we go to our home page, we're going to see our H2 element home, and then we're also going to see our div element with the message, which is going to be the value of the value in the context. And that's this value right here that we're passing to the provider. All right, so now we can see hello from context. Now on our about page, still blank. So we can grab the same context value over here, and we can display it the same way. So I'm going to copy this, paste it here, and this is the about page. And let's import this stuff. It's not going to let me auto import that one, but it would let me do it there. And now we can get this on both pages. So the advantage of using context is we can get the value of something no matter where the position this is in the component tree. So this could be a deep child, and we can access the user context by saying the useContext hook. Now we can make this more advanced by changing the value that's being stored in the provider, and then everyone is going to get the update. So what do I mean by that? Well, so I'm going to say const useState up here, and this is just going to store the state of the value. So in this case, you can say hello from context. And import useState. So this can be value, and we have set value. So now what I can do is in my provider here, I can pass in an object, which is value and set value. And now in my components over here, I'm going to move this over to the side. Actually, I think we're done with useContext. I'm just going to close it. So now in my components, I can get a value and a set value. So we'll display a value there, copy this, and do it in our about page too. And now over here, I can say set value when I want to. So button change value, and we're going to on click and set the value to hey. So now we'll refresh this. Oh, I guess we're on the about page. I was like, why aren't we seeing any difference? All right, so now when I click change value here, you'll notice the value here changes, and now when I go to my about page, it also changes here. So basically, whenever the context value is changing, or that provider value is changing, we're going to get the changes through useContext. And we can access whatever we pass in as a value here. In this case, the value and set value. Now, if we want to, you'll notice we're creating a object every single time to pass into value. One thing we could do here, as we learned, is we can use the UseMemo hook to create what the value is. So here I'm going to say provider value is equal to UseMemo, and here we're going to return an object, the value and set value. And I want to do this whenever value and set value changes. So provider value. In this case, this is not going to make a huge difference, but if your component is making a lot of changes, the value of the object is always going to change. So this prevents this provider value from changing unless the value or set value changes. Okay, so let's take this to the next level now. So now you've seen how we can pass some state and throughout basically multiple components using useContext, and how we can pass also an object and get functions that we can actually call. And we can update the state, and we can update that state across multiple components. So the next step is to actually start storing a user. And so basically we're going to do the same thing with a user. So here we're going to start with a null value. We do not have a user. And then we may have, for example, a login. So here I'm going to say login. And by the way, I can change this to be user and set user. I think that's better. So set user and user, and I can just rename this to value if I want to. Also good to note, you can push F2 and VS Code, and then I'll let you rename something, and it will change it all over the place. So now we can say user and set user in our context. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to display the user by saying json.stringify user. And we're going to do pre-tags here, and I'm going to say null 2, and this is going to be set user, and I'm going to copy this to my about page over here. So user, set user, in case we want to set the user in the about page. We probably are not going to, but in case you want to, you have access to that. So now in my index, we want to log in the user. So how might we log in a user? So I'm going to make this an asynchronous function here. And now when I click on this button, I'm going to get the current user by logging them in. So oops, login. And I'm going to import this. Now this is a function that I just created here, login over here. It's not letting me auto import it, which is making me sad. Now it is, I just had to open it up. So for the sake of this, I'm just mocking this login function, but it returns an object which is the current user. Now, of course, in your application, you want to go ahead and make a request to the server, for example, and get the user if they logged in correctly, but you get the idea. So we log in, we get the current user, and we can store it in our context like this. All right. So now let's look at our application over here. We can see the user is not there to start off with, and I guess this is the about. I keep coming to the about page and wondering where my button is. So now if I log in, we can see the user shows up. And so now I can do fun stuff like I can conditionally render buttons. So I can say if we have a user, display a logout button, if we do not have a user, display a login button. So I just added a ternary here. So if we have a user, log out, otherwise this. So then our onClick here, I can call logout to my server if I need to, and I can say set user is equal to null, right? So now I can see I can log in, we have a user in our context, and now I can log out and it's null. And now the cool thing about this is affecting all the different pages that need the user. So my about over here is null. If I log in, you see the about has the current user. And then we can come back again and we can log out, and you get the gist. So the point is, that is how one way you can go about storing the user and passing it throughout all your components and get that value using context. The gist of it is, at a top level, you store in some state the current user, and then you allow other people to see that user by creating a context and passing the value down. And then those components subscribe using useContext, and now whenever that user changes, we get a new value in our state here. So there you go. That is how you can use useContext hook in React.